This is Metro Week. Our top story, the City of Tucson's budget. We'll get details from the interim city manager. Then we'll check on the plans to widen Broadway Boulevard near downtown. Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. The Tucson City Council this week approved a budget of $1.33 billion for next fiscal year, including a tax increase to help pay for it. Here's a rundown of the numbers. The budget is nearly 8% higher than for the fiscal year that ends June 30th. The increase comes from spending decisions by the City Council based on the improving economy and higher taxes. The budget includes a property tax increase that will cost homeowners more and raise about $4 million in new revenue for the city. The improving economy is expected to account for nearly double that, mostly in sales taxes. City officials plan to spend more on graffiti cleanup, health insurance, and retirement funds for city employees. City workers will not get raises. At the same time, their benefits plans will likely not cost them more. Overall, the budget that begins in July is about $100 million higher than last year. After the City Council approved the budget Tuesday, I sat down with Martha Durkin, Tucson's interim city manager. As the city's top administrative official, the manager writes a budget proposal with specifics on revenue projections and spending, and the City Council makes changes based on its own priorities and public feedback. This week, the City Council approved the almost $1.4 billion budget that you proposed. Did they make any changes to what you initially set out?
No, they didn't make any changes to the overall amount. That is a $1.4 billion budget with almost $495 million of that, the general fund. So they approved the maximum limits, but they did give direction. And the direction was not to use our stabilization fund. That's what the city calls its rainy day fund.
Savings account.
Right,
yeah.
And so without coming back to them, and we always go back to Mayor and Council in November with a year end for the prior year and a first quarter revenue projection. And so with that, we will make decisions in November as to whether we will need to use that fund or further cut expenditures.
Before we get more into that fund, let's talk about kind of the overall. We've talked about a property tax increase, and the city is expecting sales taxes to come in higher this year as the economy improves.
Correct. So we are, by far, our biggest revenue is the sales tax. We rely on that to balance our budget. We also look to property tax, and property tax only makes about 3% of our budget. So that's not a huge amount. It will go up as the state law allows, 2% this year, and it will be about less than $20 for residents.
For the average homeowner.
$20 a year, correct.
Yeah. And then the stabilization fund, the kind of savings account for the city. We heard throughout the year, Councilmember Kozachik said he wanted to see more money saved into that fund. You said that there was some discussion about whether to use some of it. So what did the council hear at the public hearing?
At the public hearing, they heard mostly about people that wanted to have more spending go their way. But we did talk about the stabilization fund. We do have a financial policy that wants us to have about 10% in there. We're only at about 5%. So we need to work on that, and we need to contribute to it. But these economic times don't allow that as much as we would like. So the main thing is to refrain from using it, contribute to it as we can.
Now, does that have any role in the city's bond rating? We saw some of the companies downgraded the city's credit score essentially this week. Is that related to the stabilization fund? How much money's in that savings account?
That is one of the elements, but you should be clear on that because we only had one of our three agencies lowered our bond rating. And they did note that our reserves are not maybe high enough, but they also noted that we rely on economically sensitive revenue and we have pension issues that are very much out of our control.
And those are going up this year once again. Can you tell us what the background is on that?
The PSPRS, the Public Safety Retirement System, will go up. It would have been an $18 million hit to the city this year, but we are phasing it in 3 years. But that doesn't mean that next year won't go up again. We are seeing that in the case law that's coming out regarding the public safety retirement system and just in the age of the plan and the number of retirees. So that is something we still have to work on, and we will.
Now, you're the interim city manager. Your tenure is almost up, but we talk about budget challenges every single year. There's potentially a deficit, or next year pensions are going up. What does the city need long term to stop the cycle of every year trying to figure out how to make it work?
Well, every year since 2009, we have been facing this issue, and we have reduced our number of employees by over 1,000. We're not reducing this year, we're also not adding. So we have reduced our expenditures, we think, to the amount we can. We do need to increase revenue, and we're working on that. So our economic development team, you'll note that there are 2 major employers coming to Tucson next year. We've got the new AC Marriott breaking ground downtown. We also have the investment by Banner University Medical Center. So we are looking for increased economic growth, and so that's our way out of this.
Okay, and then as I mentioned, you're almost done with your tenure as
Yes.
interim city manager at the end of the month, and then Michael Ortega will come in. He's currently the county administrator in Cochise.
Correct.
So how is the transition working? You wrote this budget, the council has now approved it, and he will carry it out.
Yes, and I have been in touch with him over the last month as we finalize that. He is ready to come in and implement it, but I'm staying as for the transition, and that's the first time in a long time that the city has had a transition plan for a new manager. So we expect the best.
And I also wanted to ask about the transit budget. We've heard for years that there's, some questions about how much the city might be subsidizing transit, which happens in many cities. What were the figures on that this year?
Well, we did try to hold steady on that investment from the general fund, but to do that, we do have to reduce or create efficiencies, reduce some of the routes or create efficiencies in the operations. So we will be working on that this year. We are trying to hold firm on the general fund investment, which is about $49 million.
The City Council made another big decision this week. It approved the alignment for the Broadway Boulevard widening project. That sets the plans for which buildings will be demolished and which spared when the road is widened to 6 lanes. I spoke with Robert Lamb, who works at GLHN Architects and Engineers, whose business near Broadway and Country Club will be affected. He's been following the planning process for the road widening. Rob, your business partner was on the Citizens Task Force that worked out this plan for the Broadway widening alignment. How did that process go, being, part of a company that was involved in the process?
Well, Bill actually attended most of the meetings, the input meetings over the last 3 years. And his input was that it was actually a very good process of getting a lot of different input from different, the neighborhoods, the businesses, and the design engineers. HDR that's actually doing the design will be doing the design for the Broadway widening. So.
This was a project that had a lot of different voices, businesses being one, citizens who live along the roads, people who've just lived in Tucson a long time, the government, the voters who voted for funding. Did he feel that businesses such as yours actually had a voice and actually had a chance to weigh in and be heard?
I think they did. Bill was there at all the meetings. He always told us about the crackers and things that they always had at each one. And Bill is always vocal at those as well. I think what we found is Bill actually was, before I joined the firm, Bill actually bought the building that we're in right now in 1998, knew then that this was going to be, could be impacted, and we may have to lose the building for the betterment of Tucson. And so we were prepared, and we've been watching this to see, are we going to have to move or not?
That sounds like a risk, buying a building, even just moving in to rent one along a road that could be widened into the building's path. Did he feel it was a risk? Did you guys kind of on the edge of your seat wondering how this would go?
Not so much edge of our seat. We're more concerned, actually all of us in the management of the firm, we would rather see what's right for Tucson looking 30 years ahead, what is going to happen than just what's good for our business. We were prepared to move if necessary. And so we were looking, and Bill's participation in that was not just because, hey, what's going to happen to our building, but also, is what's being done here in the design? Are we building the right road, a proper road, a real gateway to the newly revitalized downtown that we're seeing right now? And our biggest concern right now is that we're skinnying it down too much.
So the plan calls for making the road 6 lanes, that's 3 in each direction.
That's right.
Older plans called for 8 lanes, so there would be a dedicated bus lane in those other plans.
That's correct.
You're an engineering and architecture firm, so you also rely on growth.
Yes.
Do you have any concern that there's not going to be enough capacity?
Well, they actually went through a really rigorous study and looked at what the traffic patterns were, what the forecasts were, and it originally was 8 lanes, including 2 dedicated bus lanes. And what they did is they came and they said, can we bring it down to 6 lanes, including the transit lanes? And so went through a large process of analysis, a lot of input, a lot of discussion with the engineers and came up with was really a good compromise of 6 lanes in each, 3 in each direction, including the transit lanes. The issue that we really have is that was 120 foot wide. It went from 150 down to 120. And now, lately, there was been a new proposal that's going before City Council for approval that actually narrows it down to 98 feet in certain places and really takes out, skinnies down some of the bike paths, skinnies down some of the sidewalks, takes out some of the landscaping that is going to make the entryway into our downtown important. And they want to have businesses located there, and people want to, pedestrians, all modes of transit. And also places a bit of risk for the streetcar or any dedicated bus lanes in the future if we skinny it down too much at this point. So we really like the idea of keeping it at the 120. That was the compromise that everyone came to. And we're hoping that the city engineer, the task force that's working on this, and the design team is able to really keep that in place.
Now, we should note that there's a map of the widening as the council approved it on our website. But I also wanted to ask you about there's been a call for the original plan to stay in place, the 8 lanes wide. And a lot of people that said voters voted on this in the 1997 bond package and in the 2006 Regional Transportation Authority package, and have really called for it to stay the way voters approved it. Do you think this is actually a compromise?
I think that when you look at the 8 lanes, going back to 8 lanes, I don't think that that's necessary at this point to be able to accomplish what we need in order to have this to be a gateway for the next 30 years. I think that the process they went through got to a good compromise. However, I think we do need to stop and make sure that we don't make it any skinnier. And right now there's a big push to maximize the number of buildings that will not be impacted. That's right now going before City Council, that's the first thing on the design, is we want to minimize and save as many buildings as possible. I'm feeling, and I think a lot of us at GLHN and a lot of us in Tucson are concerned that that's actually going to take out the obvious reason for widening the road to begin with and the purpose behind it, and to make Tucson the showcase city that we all want it to be, for businesses to relocate here, for jobs, for our children going forward, so that that corridor can be part of a greater Tucson.
Governor Doug Ducey is out with a new plan to fund education, but he has to convince voters to buy in.
I think people are going to see this as a fiscally responsible way to fund K-12 education. They're going to see $2 billion over the next 5 years that's going to be injected into these funding formulas. They're going to see a call for better results.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio this week is Patrick McNamara of the Arizona Daily Star, David Ripkalvis of Tucson Local Media, and my colleague Michael Chihak of Arizona Public Media. Thanks to each of you for coming in. Patrick, we're going to stay on Broadway for another minute or so. What exactly did the council decide this week? Explain what the plan is.
Well, they approved the most recent alignment that came out of the task force meetings, which was as we saw, a 6-lane roadway that does not have the dedicated bus lanes, as was talked about before. It does have bike pullouts, or bicycle lanes and bus pullouts, and it's quite a bit tailored down from the original version.
And there was a public hearing before the vote. What did the public say to the council this week before the council decided to approve the alignment?
Well, there was a lot of public input at the meeting, and generally supportive, and maybe a sense of relief. People were just glad that this process is gearing up to actually start building a new roadway, and I think people are glad that there's something concrete, something real now that they can focus on.
We heard in our interview with Rob Lamb that he was talking about some concern that in some parts of the alignment of the 2 miles, some pieces are going to be pretty narrow, other pieces are not. Did you hear anything about that on Tuesday?
Yeah, there's people who want certain buildings saved, I think, and it's why the alignment has changed. You know, it had originally been this sort of straight roadway, and now it takes more of a serpentine kind of path down the Broadway corridor. So where the city had originally anticipated all the property takes would be on the north side of the road, it's going to be a combination of north and south side properties. So yeah, there's some concerns of which buildings will have to be purchased by the city and maybe torn down versus, you know, before when they thought they had it pretty well figured out.
Does the plan reflect compromise?
I think it does. Yeah, there was definitely some compromise. You know, there's always going to be some of the folks who I think don't want to see any change or think that there's maybe a better way to approach this than what was decided. This is probably not going to be the final alignment, though. You know, when they get in design phase, it's subject to changes again.
Now, what would maybe potentially be a cause for those changes later?
Well, for example, the city owns numerous properties already on the north side of the street. So if the roadway takes up a section of parking for a retail center, the city could take one of the properties they've already purchased, demolish the buildings there, and use that as adjacent parking, for example. I think there's also be an effort to minimize the need to purchase properties on the north and south side of the street directly across from each other. So that could change some of the alignment as well.
Patrick, the city's been studying this and proposing various widenings of Broadway along this stretch for almost 30 years now, and one has to assume that means that there was an expressed need for the widening. Is there currently a traffic capacity need that justifies the widening?
Well, currently that's maybe debatable. I don't know that the city's done any traffic analysis for a long time, but keep in mind the idea of this widening is that it will connect with the Broadway Links project, which will be another connection bypassing downtown and connecting to Interstate 10. So currently we have a situation where many people, if they're heading towards Interstate 10, are self-diverting off the roadway for a more direct shot to the interstate, whether it's 22nd or Speedway or something else, because there is such a bottleneck at downtown. People who would otherwise could use Broadway to access the freeway might not do that in the future if there is a direct link to the interstate.
We've seen lots of public meetings, lots of public comment opportunities. You've mentioned the changes from potentially originally talking about acquiring properties only on the north side of the street to widen that way to now being a little more undulating. There are other projects in the RTA plan that are also massive corridors that are designed to be widened. Grant Road is one, First Avenue is one. Is this planning process and maybe also the public debate about it indicative of how those are going to go in the other areas of town?
Everybody's concerned with a major building project is going to be tearing through their region, their neighborhood, changing the appearance and, you know, maybe adding traffic. But I think keep in mind that these are RTA projects, and the RTA has been fairly steadfast in the past with staying in the spirit of the voter-approved plan. And I think the La Cañada widening is an example of that. There were a lot of residents who were concerned about increased traffic flows on the northwest side because of that widening project and the noise associated with it. And they lobbied the RTA to pay for a fairly substantial multi-mile long wall to eliminate some of the road noise. And the RTA said part of the plan that the voters approved did not include large retaining walls or sound-bearing walls, and they wouldn't spend the money for that. So I think, you know, the recent past has shown us that the RTA sticks to the plan fairly well.
David, you're a business editor and in touch with businesses all the time. Our business is seeing opportunity with this new transportation or improved transportation corridor. The way we heard when the streetcar went in, that was an economic development issue. Is this the same?
I think it is a mix, probably. You know, the businesses that are directly impacted are probably scared. They may lose their building. They may have to make changes or move. But obviously, in the big picture, I believe that businesses are pleased with it. Anytime people can get around quicker, you know, he brought up parking downtown area through Broadway. A lot of the issues are, can people find a place to park and get in your store? You know, if all of that is touched on, I believe it's going to improve business aspects downtown.
David, this week Inside Tucson Business is looking at the topic of the city's bond ratings. One of the companies, one of the 3 credit rating companies for cities, has downgraded the city's outlook and its credit report. Can you explain to us what that means?
Basically, it means that it's going to cost the city a little bit more money to borrow money. You know, I mean, it's a lot like if you and I went out to a bank and borrowed money for a car or a house. If you walk in and you have a 730 credit score, in the market today with interest rates real low, you're going to get a 2% loan to buy a car. If you walked in and had a 670 credit score, it might be 2.5%. Over the life of that loan, it'll probably cost you another $500-600 to pay for your car. Doesn't mean you won't get the money. It just means it's going to cost you a little more. And that's probably what it means for the city. You know, they're still getting a good rate. They just sold their bonds at 2%. 10 years ago, anyone would have died to get 2%. You know, but if you had a perfect rating, you probably could have got it at 1.4. So it will cost a little bit more money to pay back the loans they get. And so ultimately, it's going to cost all of us a little more money to pay for roads and infrastructure and things like that.
I just wanted to add that Councilman Steve Kozachik, who's been the one member of the council who's expressed a lot of concerns about the city's budget and spending, estimated this week that lowered bond rating by Fitch would cost the city upwards of $1 million in higher interest payments. Does that sound right?
He probably knows a lot more about it than I do, and so I wouldn't question his judgment. You know, the city is still getting a good rate. They're still able to sell their bonds. They still actually have a pretty good rating. It's the 4th highest rating you can have. They went from 3rd highest to 4th highest. I think the scary thing the city has to look at is 2 of the agencies now say in the future they're a little worried about what's going to happen. And so, I mean, the immediate downgrade certainly hurts, but the future is the question now, is what's going to happen in the future.
What are they worried about? Did they make specific comments about their concerns?
It all comes down to how much debt you have and how much money you have coming in. And they're a little worried that the city has more debt, especially long-term, maybe not today, but they're looking at long-term, and a lot of it's employee pension issues. And a lot of cities and counties and governments around the country are dealing with that. But they're saying that long-term, it looks like you're going to have a lot more debt when it comes to paying for your employee retirement plans. And we're not really certain that your tax structure, the way it's set up, with a lot of it related to sales tax, is going to bring in enough money to do that.
That volatility with sales taxes.
Yeah, sales tax is always very volatile, and we're still struggling along economically as the county, I mean, the whole county, state, everyone around here is, you know, if they see a consistent growth, they might take some of that pressure off, but right now there's just not 100% confidence by those bond agencies.
Well, and in fact, some of the city's budget is based on, for the next fiscal year, which was just passed this week, is based on an expected improvement in the sales tax, which is the city's main source of revenue. They're expecting pretty good growth there, nearly $8 million, I believe it is. And interim city manager Martha Durkin, we heard her say that volatility could be an issue with the bond ratings. At the same time, it's what the city depends on to get things done.
Right. I think it's a combination. What the city really needs is to have new businesses, you know, that can bring in more taxes. The existing businesses will probably grow. I mean, a lot of the economic forecasts show a 1 to 2 to 3% growth. Not rapid, but you know, you don't need rapid. You need steady and consistent. And so right now, I think that they're probably accurate in saying we're going to get more money. The question is, are they going to get as much as they anticipate?
Well, let's keep talking about the city, Michael. Another city topic that came up this week is a little bit of clarity on how the city election is going to work this fall. What did the council decide on that matter?
Very interesting that the city would kind of capitulate its control over its own election to Pima County, which is scheduled a bond issue borrowing for more than $800 million for county-wide projects. The county really wanted to be in on this with the city, and the city wanted to run its own election, but there's some compromise going on here. Still working out the details, but right now the city will run the primary election, which is almost meaningless because there are no opponents for anybody so far. Somebody could still step forward as a write-in and oppose the mayor, but that hasn't happened yet. But on the council races, there's no opposition for either the Republicans or the Democrats at this point. So the city said, when the general election comes around, we'll let the county run it, as long as the county puts the city races at the top of the ballot. That's mayor, 3 council seats, and then a couple of city charter changes that have been approved. The city thinks it'll save $100,000 by doing this, and the county thinks it'll get more effort and more positive votes behind this bond issue.
Now, that question of putting candidates at the top of the ballot and issues at the bottom or the back page or however it works out, that's Not any change to the normal standard we usually see, president at the top, candidates at the top, and voter questions at the bottom.
Exactly, that's how ballots usually are structured. At the same time, there's always a little bit of tension between the city government and the county government, especially on the administrative side. So working out that one detail for the city and for the county will be really important.
You mentioned the charter changes are going to be on the ballot. We've talked a little bit about those on this show, but remind us what the city approved, what voters will see in November on charter change on their ballot.
2 charter changes have surfaced that will make the ballot. The City Council approved that just this week. The first one will be making the weak mayor system a little less weak. The mayor, it isn't the personality, but the structure of the job. The mayor currently doesn't have voting rights on the council, although he does vote and always has voted. This would give him the same voting rights that the council has, that the rest of the council has. The second is a change in the way department heads in the city are hired and fired.
Now, Patrick, I want to switch over to a county debt question. You wrote a story this week talking about how Pima County manages its debt or funds its projects in a way that's very different from other counties in the state. We've talked about debt, we've talked about city elections, there's a bond election coming up, so how does this fit in that picture?
Well, the county has traditionally taken on the role of financing most of the large infrastructure projects for the region for the past, well, in living memory, I think. So all these bond projects are regional bonds that we've seen. The municipalities can do their own bonding if they want, as the city did a few years ago with the road improvement bonds. But traditionally, the county has taken the role on that. So the debt is county debt, and it's funded through the county secondary property tax. And that's different than what happens in most counties. Generally, especially in Maricopa County, it's the cities and towns that do this, and the county's role is minimal, if anything.
So one example might be this Broadway project. It's being funded by the Regional Transportation Authority, which voters countywide voted on. It also has funding from the 1997 bond package, which county voters approved. So in Maricopa County, that might have just been a city bond funding the
Yeah,
road,
it would be, in fact, I believe the city of Phoenix currently has a bond proposal for voters to look at in November that is specifically for roadway improvements and other large projects like that. And it's, a significant borrowing package of more than $1 billion, I think.
Why does Pima County do it differently?
I think part of it has to do with how the county has grown. Pima County has more than 350,000 people living in unincorporated areas, many of those in very urbanized unincorporated areas, the foothills, the northwest side. And the county provides a lot of services that its peer counties don't provide because of the way that it's historically grown.
Now, the county also voted this week to sue the state of Arizona, and that seems to me like a pretty big deal. Can you tell us what that was all about? Yeah,
well, so this goes back to the approval of the state budget earlier this year. And it goes back even further than that. There was a 1980, I think, voter initiative that capped the amount of primary property taxes that residential homeowners would pay, and they call it the 1% cap. So what it means is for the total combined within the county of primary property taxes, you would only pay the equivalent of 1%. So once you get past, which would be a combined $10 primary rate, the state had previously stepped in to pay whatever overage was associated with school funding, so that the schools could maintain equalization funding. And this year, the legislature changed that when they approved the budget, so that they've decided that this unelected, this appointed board called the Property Tax Oversight Commission would make the determination of who in the region would end up paying that overage. And in Pima County's case, they've decided that it will be the county government that will pay the overage associated with TUSD. And that county officials estimate that could cost an additional $8 to $18 million this year, that they would essentially have to tax county residents, some who don't pay into TUSD school district, and transfer that money to TUSD to pay for its services.
All right, we will keep following up on that. It hasn't moved. It's just in court at this point, so we will be sure to keep following that. Thank you all for coming in today. And as usual, all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media are available on our website. There you can listen to stories or play a live stream from NPR 89.1. Next, Arizona Week sits down with Governor Doug Ducey for details on his education funding plans.